In 1956, the American automobile industry was living through one of its most intense, competitive, and transformative moments. Every major brand was in a race to define the future of style, performance, comfort, and cultural influence. Chevrolet had just released the aggressively modern 1955-57 Tri-5 series. Ford was pushing bold design and the first hints of muscle car attitude. Chrysler was investing heavily in engineering and the new forward-look style. Yet in the middle of all this noise, fanfare, and aggressive marketing, there was one car that quietly surprised everyone who came into contact with it, one model that did not receive the spotlight it deserved at the time but would later be remembered with admiration by collectors, historians, and enthusiasts. The Pontiac Chieftain of 1956 was the unexpected standout in a year dominated by louder, flashier competitors. It was a car that combined understated elegance, surprising performance, cultural symbolism, and a personality that represented the transition of Pontiac from a conservative brand to a more powerful and forward-thinking manufacturer. The Chieftain had existed since 1949, serving as Pontiac's main full-size model line, often preferred by families and older drivers who wanted comfort and reliability rather than aggressive styling. But 1956 marked a shift. Something subtle yet significant happened in Pontiac's design philosophy. The brand, long seen as General Motors' more traditional division, introduced a Chieftain that carried both the essence of its heritage and the early seeds of what Pontiac would eventually become, a symbol of excitement, power, and American automotive ambition. While the GTO, Firebird, and later high-performance models were still years away, the 1956 Chieftain represented the moment where Pontiac started refining its identity. It was the quiet turning point, the car that showed the world that Pontiac was ready to break away from its image as Grandpa's GM brand and move toward something more dynamic. The design alone made people look twice. The 1956 Chieftain featured an imposing but balanced body shape, filled with smooth curves and subtle chrome detailing that did not scream for attention but commanded respect. The signature Pontiac silver streak, two narrow chromed strips running along the hood, continued to serve as an instantly recognizable marker. But this time, the streaks were cleaner, more integrated, more modern. The front grille had been widened, pushing a more confident stance, almost hinting at a more muscular future. The bumper design reflected GM's broader aesthetic experimentation, with multi-layered chrome pieces that made the car look bold without looking excessive. Many drivers who saw the 1956 Chieftain on the street for the first time were surprised by how much presence it carried, especially considering that Pontiac had not yet fully entered the styling revolution of the late 1950s. People often said the Chieftain looked like a car ready to lead, not one that followed trends. And in a decade when design leadership meant mass-market success, Pontiac needed exactly this. The 1956 model year brought a more refined interior as well. Inside the cabin, Pontiac managed to create an environment that felt expensive even though the Chieftain was priced for middle-class families. Soft bench seats, large windows, and a thoughtful dashboard layout made the car feel spacious, open, and almost luxurious. Pontiac was still targeting families who wanted to travel comfortably across the country, and the Chieftain's interior reflected that mission perfectly. A family of 5 could take a long weekend road trip with complete comfort, surrounded by the soft hum of a V8 engine and the promise of reliability. And the engine is where the 1956 Chieftain truly surprised everyone. Pontiac updated its powertrain lineup with the introduction of the Stratostreak V8, which became a defining moment for the brand. This engine represented Pontiac's break from its older straight-eight design, offering far better performance, smoother acceleration, and greater durability. The 1956 version featured a 316 cubic inch displacement and power output that reached up to 227 horsepower, depending on the configuration. While this number might not sound extraordinary by today's standards, in 1956 it placed the Chieftain squarely among the more powerful full-size cars available in America. The Chieftain had gone from being a conservative cruiser to a legitimate performer, and this transformation shocked many buyers who had assumed that Pontiac was still sleeping in the shadows of Chevrolet and Oldsmobile. Drivers who tested the Chieftain that year consistently reported how smooth the engine felt, especially paired with Pontiac's improved automatic transmission. Acceleration was surprisingly strong for a family-oriented car, and reviewers of the era described the driving experience as confident, stable, and composed. Pontiac engineers had clearly invested in refining not only power but also the feeling of control. People expected the Chieftain to be comfortable, but they did not expect it to be fun. Yet the car delivered exactly that, a sense of enjoyable, effortless driving that was rare for a model positioned in this price category. Enthusiasts today still point out that Pontiac's gradual reputation for performance did not start in the 1960s but in quiet moments like the 1956 Chieftain's debut, where the seeds of a future performance culture were planted. Another element that made the 1956 Chieftain surprising was its cultural symbolism. Pontiac had long used Native American imagery as part of its branding identity, and in 1956 the connection remained strong, visible in the hood emblem and in the name Chieftain itself. To many Americans living in the 1950s, this representation conveyed themes of leadership, endurance, and tradition. Whether right or wrong by modern cultural standards, the symbolism resonated deeply in that era. The Chieftain name suggested a car that was bold yet noble, something steady and trustworthy. Buyers often described the Chieftain as a car that felt American, not only in engineering but in cultural emotion. The 1956 redesign amplified these associations: a cleaner, sharper emblem, a more confident stance, and a driving experience that matched the promise of the name. Despite all of these strengths, the 1956 Chieftain remained underrated during its own time. Chevrolet, with its massive national marketing and the iconic Tri-5 styling, stole much of the spotlight that year. Ford was aggressively advertising new features and performance packages. Even Plymouth and Dodge were pushing for attention with modernized V8 engines and updated body designs. Pontiac simply did not produce the same level of flashy promotion. The Chieftain was a car that you needed to see in person to fully appreciate. It did not photograph as loudly as a Chevy Bel Air. It did not have the extreme fins that would appear on late 1950s cars. It did not dominate dealership billboards. But those who test drove it understood immediately that this was a special machine, something that offered more than the brochures suggested. Collectors today often smile when they talk about how the 1956 Chieftain was overlooked. They describe it as the best-kept secret of Pontiac's early V8 era, or the car that people ignored in 1956 but chase like treasure today. In retrospect, the Chieftain's conservative styling is precisely what gives it charm now. It represents a transition moment, a design that fits perfectly between the rounded early 1950s shapes and the dramatic fins of the late 1950s. Its chrome is tasteful, its proportions balanced, and its front fascia unmistakably Pontiac. Many automotive historians say that without the Chieftain stepping forward in 1956, Pontiac's future muscle-era identity might never have been possible. Driving the 1956 Chieftain on a quiet American road was an experience that car enthusiasts still dream about. Imagine a long stretch of open highway, the kind that cuts across the Midwest or follows the contours of California's old coastal routes. The Chieftain glides smoothly at 55 or 60 miles per hour, its V8 humming with the confidence of a motor engineered for long journeys. The steering feels steady, not too heavy, not too loose. There is a sense of floating, not in a disconnected way, but in the comfortable, reassuring manner that 1950s American suspensions were famous for. The large windshield provides an expansive view of the road, and the sunlight reflects softly across the chrome ornaments inside the cabin. Passengers relax into the broad seats, and conversations flow easily as the landscape passes by. This was a time when cars were not just transportation, they were experiences, memories, companions for entire family histories. Many families who owned a 1956 Chieftain carried deep emotional attachments to it. They drove it to vacations, weddings, graduations, and Sunday picnics. It was a car that witnessed moments of American life and held memories in its seats and door panels. There are countless stories of children who learned to drive in their parents' Chieftain, of young couples who took cross-country trips, of families who packed the trunk for summer adventures. The car became part of daily life, a symbol of stability and prosperity in the post-war United States. Even decades later, elderly owners still recall the sound of the engine starting on cold mornings, the look of the chrome sparkling in the driveway, the smell of the interior, a mixture of fabric, gasoline, and time. The Chieftain's durability only added to its reputation. Many of these cars stayed on the road far longer than expected. Mechanics frequently praised Pontiac for building engines and transmissions that could handle extensive mileage without serious issues. The structural integrity of the body, the thickness of the steel panels, and the attention to mechanical simplicity all contributed to the car's longevity. Enthusiasts restoring 1956 Chieftains today often comment on how well-preserved the chassis and mechanical components remain, even after more than 60 years. Rust was certainly a concern for all American cars of this era, but the Chieftain tended to resist structural decay better than many of its competitors. This longevity is part of the reason why the car surprised so many people back in 1956 and continues to surprise collectors today. It was not only stylish and powerful but also built with a seriousness that Pontiac would later become known for. When people looked at the Chieftain, they expected comfort. What they got instead was comfort plus performance plus engineering strength, a combination that felt ahead of its time. Many customers walked into Pontiac dealerships simply looking for a reliable family car, and they walked out with a vehicle that felt unexpectedly premium. Pontiac, in its understated way, delivered more than the market expected. The 1956 Chieftain also reflected the changing identity of the American driver. By the mid-1950s, people were beginning to favor individuality, even in mass-produced cars. The Chieftain's design balanced conservative elegance with hints of personality, allowing buyers to feel unique without being too bold. It was a car for someone who valued quality more than flash, someone who appreciated detail rather than extravagance. As America entered the era of rock and roll, suburban expansion, and cultural transformation, the Chieftain represented a bridge between old-school American reliability and the beginning of a more expressive automotive culture. As the years went by, the 1956 Pontiac Chieftain slowly transitioned from a family car of its time into a nostalgic symbol of an era when automobiles were expressions of identity and optimism. Many people who owned one during the 1950s or 1960s often shared stories about how dependable it was during long drives, how it provided comfort during family trips, or how it became a trusted companion for daily life. But as the decades progressed, something unexpected happened. The Chieftain began to emerge as a hidden gem among collectors, a car that had been overshadowed when new but was now recognized for its charm, engineering, and unique place in Pontiac's evolution. The qualities that once made it modest in appearance became exactly what made it appealing to enthusiasts who looked for authenticity over exaggeration. During the 1970s and 1980s, as the muscle car era faded and automotive design moved into more angular, efficiency-driven shapes, many enthusiasts started to look back at earlier decades with longing. They searched for vehicles that captured the feeling of freedom and style that defined the golden age of American cruising. While cars like the Chevrolet Bel Air, Ford Fairlane, and Chrysler New Yorker were already deeply established in collector culture, the Pontiac Chieftain remained more mysterious, more quietly admired. It was not the car that appeared on every poster or in every classic car magazine, but once someone encountered a well-preserved Chieftain at a local show or auction, it always left an impression. People would walk around it, observing the balanced lines, the elegant chrome work, the clean profile, and almost always they said the same thing: "I forgot how beautiful this car is." That sense of rediscovery became one of the Chieftain's trademarks. The engine, the heart of any classic car, remained one of the biggest reasons why the Chieftain continued to impress. The Stratostreak V8, introduced only a year earlier in 1955 and refined for 1956, proved to be incredibly resilient. While many engines from the 1950s suffered from durability issues, overheating, or poor long-term reliability, the Pontiac V8 earned a reputation for lasting well beyond expectations. Mechanics who restored classic Pontiacs often commented that the Chieftain's engine design, with its strong block, efficient oiling system and well-engineered cylinder heads, had stood the test of time remarkably well. Cars that had been abandoned in barns for 30 or 40 years could often be brought back to life with surprisingly little internal work. This resilience added an emotional dimension to the Chieftain. It was not just a car that looked good for its time, it was a car that refused to die, a car that carried the determination and spirit of 1950s America deep within its mechanical bones. Another aspect that helped the Chieftain gain value among collectors was its balanced personality. Some classic cars became popular because they were extremely flashy or because they symbolized excessive design trends of their era. Others became known for raw performance, attracting those who wanted speed above all else. But the Chieftain stood in the middle of these extremes. It was powerful but not wild, elegant but not extravagant, dependable but not boring. That balance made it appealing to a wide range of enthusiasts, from those who loved cruising to those who appreciated engineering history or mid-century Americana. When you sat behind the wheel of a Chieftain, you could feel a sense of calm authority. The car did not demand attention, but it commanded respect. It didn't need to shout to be memorable. As decades passed and Pontiac as a brand eventually disappeared in the early 21st century, the Chieftain became even more meaningful. It represented a chapter from a company that once played a major role in shaping American automotive culture. Pontiac's heritage was built on passion, personality, and performance, and although the brand would go on to create icons like the GTO, Trans Am, and Firebird, the Chieftain stood as a reminder of Pontiac's beginnings. It was the bridge between the conservative post-war years and the rebellious spirit that would later define the 1960s and 1970s. Many collectors saw owning a Chieftain as owning a piece of Pontiac's soul, the part rooted in tradition, strength, and quiet innovation. When restoring a 1956 Chieftain today, enthusiasts often remark on how satisfying the process is. The car's structure, built with heavy-gauge steel and solid mechanical components, responds beautifully to restoration. Chrome pieces, once polished, regain their mirror-like shine, bringing back the charm of 1950s styling. The dashboard, with its symmetrical shapes and color-matched panels, transforms the interior into a museum-like showcase of mid-century American craftsmanship. Upholstery shops enjoy working on Chieftain seats because the materials, patterns, and stitching reflect a period where attention to detail mattered on even the most affordable cars. Restorers often say that bringing a Chieftain back to life is like reviving an old friend, a companion that has patiently waited for decades to return to the open road. Driving a fully restored 1956 Chieftain today is an experience that blends nostalgia with genuine joy. The steering is softer than modern cars, the suspension more relaxed, the brakes require a bit more anticipation, but these differences are what make the drive special. You don't drive a Chieftain for efficiency or speed. You drive it to feel something that modern cars no longer offer, a connection to the road, to history, to the mechanical world. As you cruise down a quiet road, the engine's steady rumble mixes with the wind brushing against the chrome, and every mile feels like stepping deeper into the 1950s. Passers-by nearly always smile, wave, or pull out their phones to take pictures. The Chieftain has a presence that transcends time. It doesn't look outdated, it looks iconic. Car shows, especially those focused on classic Americana, often feature at least one Chieftain, and it is almost always surrounded by curious spectators. Many younger enthusiasts, those who did not grow up with 1950s cars, are surprised by how refined the Chieftain looks compared to what they expect from that era. They expect giant fins, excessive chrome, or exaggerated proportions. Instead, they find a car that appears elegant, balanced, and surprisingly modern in some details. The clean body lines and thoughtful proportions make the Chieftain more timeless than many of its contemporaries. In conversations, owners often explain that this understated design is exactly why the Chieftain has aged so gracefully. It was never about following the wildest trends, it was about consistency, quality, and subtle character. Collectors also appreciate the historical moment the 1956 Chieftain represents. America in the mid-1950s was experiencing a cultural and economic boom. Highways were expanding, families were growing, suburbs were developing, and car ownership was becoming a key symbol of prosperity and identity. The Chieftain was made for that life. It was built to travel from state to state, visit relatives, commute to work, and take families to new suburbs that were transforming the American landscape. It was both functional and aspirational, a car that people bought not only because they needed it but because it made them feel hopeful and proud. That emotional connection, tied deeply to the spirit of 1950s America, gives the Chieftain a unique cultural value today. Another surprising aspect of the 1956 Chieftain's legacy is the positive attention it receives from people who are not typical car enthusiasts. Artists admire its proportions and chrome details for photography and illustration. Historians appreciate its representation of a transitional period in American culture. Families who discover an old Chieftain in a relative's garage often feel an emotional shock, realizing that decades of personal memories are frozen inside the car. Even filmmakers use the Chieftain in movies set in the 1950s because it perfectly captures the era without overwhelming the scene with flamboyance. It blends into the past naturally, almost effortlessly. Over time, prices for well-preserved or restored 1956 Chieftains started to climb. While still more affordable than some high-demand classics, the Chieftain became increasingly sought after by people who knew how rare it had become to find one in excellent condition. Many original models had been used thoroughly throughout the 1950s and 1960s and later scrapped, leaving fewer surviving examples. Those that remained often required extensive restoration. This scarcity contributed to an increase in collector appreciation. Unlike more mainstream classics, the Chieftain offered the pleasure of owning something unique, something not found at every car show or in every classic car advertisement. It appealed to people who wanted a beautiful piece of American automotive history without choosing the obvious options. Interestingly, many modern owners describe the 1956 Chieftain as a car that creates connections between generations. Grandparents share stories of their youth, parents teach their children how to care for classic engines, and younger enthusiasts learn about a time before computers, sensors, and plastic dominated car design. The Chieftain becomes a conversation piece, a bridge between eras. Families gather in garages to work on the car, polish the chrome, or tune the engine. For many, it represents more than a vehicle. It embodies tradition, belonging, and the continuity of personal history. One of the most touching aspects of the Chieftain's legacy comes from the stories of owners who kept their cars for decades. Some bought them new in 1956 and never let them go. Others inherited them from parents or grandparents and dedicated years to restoring them. They often speak about the car as if it were a family member, describing the smell of the interior, the feel of the steering wheel, the sound of the engine turning over in the morning. These sensory memories deepen the emotional bond people have with their Chieftains. When such owners pass down the car to the next generation, they pass down not just metal and chrome but an entire chapter of personal history. Today, when someone discovers a 1956 Chieftain in a barn, under a tarp, or sitting untouched in a garage, it feels like uncovering buried treasure. The patina, the faded paint, the cracked upholstery, all of these elements tell a story. Restorers often document the process meticulously, capturing every moment of revival, from the first engine cough to the first successful test drive. Watching a Chieftain return to life is a powerful experience, almost symbolic of bringing the past forward to meet the present. And once restored, the car becomes a rolling piece of American heritage, admired wherever it goes. For enthusiasts who drive a Chieftain today, the experience offers something that modern cars cannot replicate. Modern vehicles prioritize efficiency, aerodynamics, and digital control. They are quiet, smooth, and technologically advanced. But they lack the personality, the tactile feedback, and the emotional resonance of a classic. When you drive a Chieftain, you feel the engine through the floor, the vibrations through the steering column, the wind rushing around the edges of the windows. You feel involved. Every moment behind the wheel reminds you that driving was once a deeply sensory experience, one that engaged the body and the mind. The Chieftain invites you to slow down, enjoy the ride, and appreciate the art of automotive craftsmanship. In the end, the 1956 Pontiac Chieftain stands as one of the most unexpected stars of its decade. A car that did not dominate headlines when new but quietly earned respect through its design, performance, and enduring presence. A car that represented Pontiac's transition from tradition to excitement. A car that brought families together, traveled across states, carried memories for generations, and now lives again in the care of passionate enthusiasts. It is a symbol of what American engineering and culture once celebrated: strength, elegance, personality, and heart. The Chieftain may have been overlooked in 1956, but today it shines brightly as one of the most admirable and soulful vehicles of its time, a reminder that true greatness does not always come with fanfare. Sometimes it is found in the quiet confidence of a car built with purpose and pride.